Hello. Hello, I'm looking for a small boy. He lost in ping pong. He lost in ping pong last month. Has anybody seen him? He lost? If you guys find a young boy, his name's Mario, he lost in ping pong last month, let him know that I'm looking for him so I can beat him. Thanks. So when it comes down to staying in Wisconsin, I'm actually really bad at it. Anytime the winter gets really cold, I just have a tendency to go south to like Texas, South Padre Island, maybe like go to the Bahamas or something. No, I don't do any of that. But we actually decided to go down to California to visit our friends over at AccuAir to figure out how like they do stuff. Because when you really think about like different sort of air suspension systems and things like that, everybody always seems to talk about AccuAir, and not just AccuAir products, but like how they're made, because there's so much stuff that goes into what they do. So we just figured we would actually answer the question of how an AccuAir Endo CVT system actually is made from start to finish. So if you guys are ready to learn, like we're like on the magic school bus from like 5th grade, we're gonna go through the process from start to finish, and we'll show what they'll like let us show, because you know there's legalities and stuff like that, on how it's actually assembled, performed, tested, all of that good stuff. By the way, Alex from Fitment Industries. Don't forget to subscribe. Let's go check it out over there. So if you guys didn't really know, when you're looking at a pressurized vessel, you're pretty much looking at something that could go wrong very, very easily if you don't do it the right way, because you have a ton of pressure that's inside that tank that if you have bad leak or bad seals, bad anything, you can get out of roundness, you can have bad things happen in the trunk of your car, things like that. So what they'll go through is they'll actually test it before they even get into anything else. So what you're gonna see is behind me, these guys have made their own testing equipment to essentially make it so that they can look at everything on the metal, make sure the hardness testing is conducted correctly, making sure that it's not out of round. They have something called a donut gauge, which sounds absolutely delicious, and a couple other things that they do to make sure essentially that the actual barrel of aluminum, the hollow barrel of aluminum, which I know I'm gonna get judged for in the comments for saying it like that, is actually ready to be assembled the appropriate way. And what you're gonna notice as we go through the entire process is that really it comes down to the little details that make this thing so gosh darn neat. And this is just one of the first steps. So what happens is after it's actually been tested for everything that they need, they'll actually take it to a machine shop here in town. So it's a local thing that they do to actually get some cool business. So if you guys didn't know, a lot of what you're gonna see here, they do in-house, or they have the staff in-house, or they actually ship out locally, so that a lot of it can be, you know, essentially done just right next door. So you're gonna see once this stuff is done, conducted, completed, they're ready to roll, it'll actually get shipped out to a machine shop so that it can get all like the little things done that it needs to, so it actually starts to look like a CVT system. So once everything gets back from machining, you actually have the process of getting everything together. So you've got the tanks that are pretty much ready to roll, which are nothing more than just a giant, really strong tube. Then you have the end caps, and the end caps actually have to be assembled as well, and they have a bunch of really colorful parts here, but you essentially have your needles. You actually have filters, you have all sorts of stuff to make sure that when it actually gets put in, that you can have a snug, tight fit. So they actually did a cutaway, which is pretty neat in comparison to when it's all assembled, which is great for people like me, that you could tell me something 12 times in a row and I still won't understand it, but if I see it, it'll actually make a whole lot more sense. So essentially what happens, and you're gonna have to come closer because I know you can't see this, essentially what ends up happening is they install the caps at this point, and then you're gonna see the connections to the module, which we'll see later down the road, connect to the back to the actual manifold, and then that's how it's gonna behave outside. It's gonna get your controls out to your struts. So pretty much what's gonna happen here is you have more assembly, and in just the most fundamental way, it's again done in-house, and it's done right here, because what ends up happening is they're able to control everything to make sure that the QC is up to par. So then what happens is if there's any issues with anything with their, like maybe their needles or their filters or anything like that, they'll actually catch that down the line before anything gets shipped out. And I think one of the coolest things about this is just how detailed they really are in terms of like keeping the quality consistent. So one thing that you may notice is that this actually doesn't go anywhere, but the purpose of that is that if anything manages to finagle its way into the tank itself, it won't get into anything else. And this is actually going to keep the debris outside of the manifold, so you don't have to worry about the manifold actually failing, which is pretty neat when you really think about it, because it's not something that you would ever see. And it's not really something that AccuAir is going to tell you too much about, because it's just kind of something that they expect to do so that their product doesn't die. So once everything comes out of the machine shop and it's coming back, in the process, they do this thing called wiring. Now, if you guys didn't know, wiring is probably one of the worst things in the world. If you've ever done an engine swap, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Here's the thing though, is that AccuAir really just kind of does it themselves, all of it, which is pretty interesting, and here's why it's so interesting. So if you guys didn't know, making different harnesses, different adapters, different pieces can actually be extremely strenuous, and a lot of people will actually just outsource it, right? They outsource it to Mexico, they outsource it overseas, they oversee it pretty much anywhere except doing it in-house. And what AccuAir realized is they can have better lead times, better supply management, and everything in between if they actually just bring it in-house and do it themselves. So their solution to kind of dealing with some of the inconsistencies of not having the best quality when they'd outsource it is actually just bringing it in-house. So everything that they're doing in terms of the wiring harnesses, the thing that you see from here on out, essentially is all done right here. And you have to remember the reason for that is because at the end of the day, which I know I just said that, they won't have to worry about anything failing down the road because they're the ones making it. So while the end caps are getting assembled, you essentially have the actual hardware that makes everything happen. So the Wabco compressors are actually used in some things that you probably didn't know. So like Tesla's, a lot of OE high-end like luxury Euro manufacturers use the same exact compressors that you're gonna see AccuAir using for their CVT systems. Now what they have to do is they essentially have to make it and grow on top of what they've already just bought. And what they need to do is they need to make it unique for themselves. So they've made their own tools to actually hold the compressor the right way so that they can start assembling what they need inside the actual compressor so that everything really starts to communicate. So you have everything from your electronics to your wiring all really starting to come together. Everything is then tested to make sure that it's all ready to go, because really it's a very expensive process. If you go into the potting, which is the next step in terms of making everything cure correctly so that nothing leaks or gets loose, which is this really clean but should be messy system that kind of helps compare everything, keeps it as clean as possible. So once you actually have all the electronics put together, you've got the wiring ready to go, the compressor's looking hot, you're ready, you got the whole little potting black goo stuff from Prometheus, and then what ends up happening is they're gonna add their own, I wanna call it an assembly. It's pretty much like a roll cage that has like a 3-axis stabilizer within it. And what that does is obviously a compressor moves, and if you've ever heard a compressor before, it sounds like something's dying in your trunk. So they fix it by adding these isolators that essentially allow the compressor to move within the tank, but that compressor, when it moves, it's not actually hitting anything or touching anything. So what you end up having is a very quiet system, which is probably one of the biggest things that makes the CVT system so special, is how quiet it actually is. But what they have to do is, while they're actually assembling that system, they actually have to dial it in as if you would an alignment. So they'll go through the rest of the process, continuing to build on top of the compressor in terms of the wiring, the balance, making sure that everything's working together, and then they'll go through and test it to make sure that while it's within spec, that you don't have to worry about those isolation things being maybe out of spec or getting noisy or anything like that, because every single one is tested before it goes into final assembly. Okay, so then the next step that you're gonna have is actually putting everything together. So you have the actual bodies right here, and that's gonna be the different colors, which obviously bronze is the best one out of all of them, that they're gonna start pulling to actually make everything work. So they have this really fancy PO sheet that essentially has 1 million check marks and 1 million signatures to make sure everything is going together the way that they need to. Then what you're gonna have are the end caps right over here that we talked about before, because you have to have the end caps and the actual body to make it work. And then what they're gonna do is they're gonna pull the module from the back once they've actually completed all of the assembly with the actual compressor in tow. So then what you have right here is their final assembly lot. And what they're doing here is they take the PO, they start putting everything together. Now what the neatest thing about this setup is that it's actually a little bit different than what we're normally used to. So like these guys don't have necessarily, like they can't go to Harbor Freight and like pick up this thing, this little module for like 20 bucks. They had to make this step system that can actually hold the tank together so they can get everything put together, so they can get the caps put on, and so that it actually works appropriately. So something that you're gonna see is pretty neat is that a lot of the things that they actually made here to assemble everything, they built themselves because nobody else out there really had it, which is pretty neat. What's gonna happen is everything is torqued to spec, they start dialing in all the wiring, they start dialing in everything that they need, and then it goes to testing, which is really where a lot of the fun stuff starts to happen. The second to last step is that it goes through its final testing. So what you're gonna see is a tank of water and then obviously the actual CVT system here. Now this is a CVT, so they test a couple different things, and I'm totally gonna miss one or two just because, but they do 0 to 200 pressure testing to make sure that it actually fills up at the time that it needs to fill up. So if it doesn't fill up, it goes back. If it fills up too fast, it goes back. It needs to fill up at an appropriate time that they set to make sure that there's nothing wrong with what's happening inside the system. Then they dump it back down to like 160, 150. Then they test it again from 160 to 200. Then they overpressurize it to 230 to make sure that there's nothing leaking or any big issues that are happening in there. Then they put it in the water to make sure that there's no air leaking or anything like that. And then they continuously repeat these steps to make sure that everything on the inside and outside ends up being good, so that when it gets to final assembly, you don't have to worry about like an O-ring that was missed or something that was leaking or anything like that, because they've literally gone through testing every step of the way. All right, so once everything is tested, you got all the pieces together, they've assembled everything, everything's been machined and painted and all that sort of stuff, you might be thinking, do they actually just like throw a wet tank into the box? And no, they don't. They go, they dry it off, they clean it, they put it in a nice bag, then they heat it up, they shrink wrap it, they make it look good and ready to roll, and then they actually assemble it, they put it in the box, they get all the cushioning and all the insulation in there so that nothing moves around, and then it gets shipped to your door. So one of the craziest things as we've kind of gone through the process is the attention to detail. And you guys might be wondering, a lot of times we get comments about air suspension being super expensive, and yeah, it's true. I mean, air suspension isn't the cheapest thing that you could possibly buy when it comes down to the grand scheme of things that you can install in your car. But when you're looking at something that goes into the intense details of like what goes on here, it kind of makes sense as to why it is the way that it is. And when you go into how much effort that these guys go through to make sure that everything is assembled correctly, that you have the instructions that you need, that you have all the information possible so that when you put it in your car, you can actually be happy the first time that you use it, that's really what makes the difference. And that's probably one of the coolest things that we noticed here from start to finish as you look at the CVT system and pretty much anything that comes out of this warehouse. So we hope you guys enjoyed this kind of breakdown. Let us know in the comment section if you have any questions, and if you're looking for AccuAir suspension or just wheels, tires in general, head to fitmentindustries.com. I'm Alex from Fitment Industries. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you later. Peace.